Commas. We've made it to commas, English students. Commas are possibly the punctuation that bothers, irritates, and confounds English students around the world. Mostly that's because, particularly if English is not your first language, um, well, commas aren't used in many languages, frankly. Um, they're not a common part of languages around the world. Commas, I don't know if they're a uniquely English thing, but they are relied on quite heavily in English in order to create a variety of different sentence structures. So if you've ever been told that you need to work on your commas, and that's probably 75% of you, then you're definitely not alone. So commas tend to be the most difficult punctuation to learn. There was, in fact, a study done on the difficulty of various punctuations. Of course, periods is way down low, easy to learn to use. Quotation marks, just above periods. Semicolons and colons, interestingly enough, easier to use. And then commas ranked highest and most difficult. The commas that are going to be most important for you in your academic career are the first probably 4 or 5 commas I'm going to talk about in this lecture. So I'm going to spend the bulk of time on that, and then I'm going to quickly move through the last commas. So for your purposes, you'll want to make sure you're paying attention to the first part of this lecture. It is the bulk of what you will be quizzed on in the quizzes that appear on your Moodle site as well. Often we are told, particularly in school, to put commas where you would naturally pause in your speech. But as Stephen Colbert quite rightly points out, if you have an unusual way of speaking, or you naturally take pauses, perhaps because English isn't your second language, you take pauses in different places in speech, then you're not really going to get a good idea of where to put that comma. Commas actually do follow sets of rules, and you do typically need to know what a complete sentence looks like, right? So we start off the year learning and understanding what a complete sentence looks like. A complete sentence has a subject and a verb. And if you can identify that subject and you can identify that verb, you're going to know when you need a comma. Now, the first, quote unquote, the first 3 commas, there's actually like 5 or 6 in that first 3, but those first 3 commas you can test for. Commas 4 through 7 on this list of commas are things that you typically look up. Most people don't use or don't have all of the rules in their head, and they just get used to looking them up. So don't hesitate to do that when you need to. The first time we need a comma, of course, is when we're using the fanboys comma, which is a simple conjunction. So there's conjunction words and, but, nor, or, for, your, set, and or. I just jumbled that together just to help you out. They are on the screen. So there are those just conjunctions, and then there's the simple conjunction, which connects 2 complete sentences. So you know if you have a subject and a verb in the first part of the sentence, and a subject and a verb after that conjunction word, you know you need a comma in between them. So here, the game, that's our subject, our verb was, so we have our subject and our verb here. After but, we have the crowd. So here's another subject. Here's another verb. The crowd refused. So we know that in front of this but, we're going to need a comma. Similarly here, the student explained her question. Here's our subject, the student. Here's our verb, explained. Here's our conjunction word, yet. And we have another subject, the instructor, and another verb, did not or didn't. So we know in front of this yet, we need a comma. So when you're reading through your own paper, look for words, look for the fanboys, have that fanboys in your head, look for the word, and then see where your subjects are. Because your subjects will tell you right off the bat whether or not you're going to need a comma in front of that conjunction. The second kind of comma are the introductory commas. There are 3 kinds of introductory commas. I see there's actually like more commas than you think. So these introductory commas, they're very similar to each other and they're basically testable in the same way. So when you're marked for having an introductory comma error, which I usually do mark, I say intro comma error, or I'll just say it's a comma error. If I note that you're having struggles with introductory comma errors, you can flip right here and you can take a look at some examples to see where that comma should go. However, similarly, you're looking for subjects, you're looking for verbs. Now, with introductory commas that have a clause to them, a common starter word like after, although, as, because, if, since, when, while, if it's a clause that you're beginning the sentence with, it typically means that the sentence has been what I like to think of as broken, right? So instead of a quote unquote normal sentence that starts with the subject, right? Normally, a sentence begins with the subject, then the verb, then the object, and anything else, adverbs, adjectives you're going to put in there. But if they've broken it, if they've moved those things, and they've decided to start with a clause, then they have to put a comma to glue the broken sentence back together. So I think of these as broken sentences that are glued together with commas. So let's take a look. While I was eating, the cat scratched at the door. Now, normally this sentence would be, the cat scratched at the door while I was eating. And that sentence wouldn't have any commas in it. It would just start with a capital, end with a period. But because this person really wanted to emphasize that they were eating, and oh my God, this cat scratched at the door, right? So they wanted to emphasize while I was eating. Usually you emphasize what's put at the beginning of the sentence. So while I was eating, the cat scratched at the door. So this person must have been really irritated, right? But as you can see, here is our subject, the cat. We have another subject, I. But here, because we have this subject right in the middle of the sentence, the cat scratched at the door, we know we need a comma in front of it because the sentence has been broken and moved. Because her alarm clock was broken, comma, she was late for class. So she was late for class because her alarm clock was broken would be the quote unquote normal sentence. But because we're emphasizing that the alarm clock was broken, they've moved it and glued it together with a comma. Similarly, when the snow stops falling, comma, we'll shovel the driveway. Same rule. The second introductory comma is the phrase comma. And this works much the same as the clause comma, but there's no clause necessarily, right? Having finished the test, he left the room. Now, normally, again, this would be he left the room having finished the test. So because that subject is right in the middle of the sentence, it's been moved, you need that comma to tack it back together. To get a seat, you'd better come early. You'd better come early to get a seat. After the test, but before lunch, I went jogging. In that person's case, they wanted to emphasize when they did it, not that they went jogging. The sun radiating intense heat, we sought shelter in the cafe. Now, last is the single word. Now, the single word is usually just tacked onto the front of a regular sentence. And the comma is there just to show, hey, I'm going to glue this little sentence, this little word right to the beginning here, right there. Now, these aren't used very frequently in college papers, except when we're using one of these conjunctions, however, although, something like that. You want to put it at the beginning of a sentence, you tack it on with a comma. These other single words are a little more informal. Well, perhaps he meant no harm. Yes, the package should arrive tomorrow morning. So will you use those more typically in emails and business letters, in other kinds of informal notations and notes and emails and things like that. Bad comma humor. I constantly feel out of place. Let's take a look at these quick example sentences. So take a moment to pause this recording, do these three, and I'll show you what the answers are. So hit pause. Okay, you hit pause, right? So in the first one, to buy a dog from the SPCA, you need to have identification, an apartment, and a reference. So commas need to be in front of you, because here is a subject you need. So you need a comma right after SPCA. And if you're a fan of the Oxford comma, you need a comma right in front of and. In number 2, the dog was sitting on the fence and no one knew how he climbed up there. Here we have a fanboy and. Here's our subject, the dog, was is our verb. Here's our conjunction and. Here's our subject, no one, verb knew. So in front of this and, you need to have a comma. Lastly, she was miserable in her job and wanted to quit. This does not need a comma. We have a subject and a verb here, she was, but we don't have a subject and a verb after and, so this last one does not need a comma. Often we also use commas to set off. So if you've written out a sentence and you need to add some words into the middle of it, you're going to put commas to tack it in there. Which is a common additive. For example, that Tuesday, which happens to be my birthday, is the only day when I'm available to meet. This person could have just said that Tuesday is the only day when I'm available to meet. But because they wanted to let you know, hey, it's my birthday that day, they have added a which clause. And so in front of the which and after the clause is where you're going to put those commas. You test to make sure they're in the right spot by taking out that series of words and seeing if the sentence still makes sense. So if you can read it, that Tuesday is the only day when I'm available to meet, and it's still a complete sentence, then you know you've put the commas in the right place. If you're adding a phrase to the middle, for example, this restaurant has an exciting atmosphere. The food, on the other hand, is rather bland. You can tack that in with commas as well. Sometimes it's just a single word. I appreciate your hard work, in this case, comma. However, comma, you seem to have overexerted yourself. You could take out that single word and the sentence would still make sense. Keep in mind that and which are not the same. Which clauses are not essential. They can be taken out and the sentence retains its meaning. That clauses are essential. You can't really remove it and the sentence means the same thing. You'll see this marked on your papers as a that which confusion or a TW. For example, the book that I borrowed from you is excellent. The fact that I borrowed it from this person is really important information and you can't just leave it out. So that's when you use that. The apples that fell out of the basket are bruised. The fact that they fell out of the basket is necessary to understanding the sentence, so you can't just take it out. Most of the time you want to try and use that. And it's usually when you're trying to use that and it really doesn't work that you know which is the right choice. Most of the time, that is going to do the job for you. You also need commas in a list. You're going to use commas to separate 3 or more words, phrases, or clauses written in a series. This is called the series comma, and most of you are very familiar with it. I love this joke, but I'm not going to pause on it. You're also going to use commas to separate adjectives. Again, this is something you're very familiar with, so I'm going to let you review that on your own. Shifts and questions at the end of sentences aren't too common in college papers, so again, something to review on your own. Free modifiers are a subject that I'll talk about on a case-by-case basis.